Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. This is the third build video of my SoarcerEee electric glider, and in this video I'm going to be working through the completion of the wing, building the second half of the wing, joining the halves together and finalising the wing with the leading edge and wingtips, and in effect getting the wing ready for covering. So without further ado, let's jump over to the build bench and see the various steps that I have to go through to complete the wing. The cap strips have been put on the lower half of the wing, so it's now time to build the other half. And I know I did say I was going to do this off camera, but what I want to do is actually build this other wing half differently to the first wing half, because I did mention it in the first video. If you recall, let's turn that round. What I said was you could pin the cap strips down and glue the ribs on top of those. You could, instead of cutting the ribs out after gluing them in, you could cut the ribs and butt them to the dihedral brace. So that's actually what I'm going to do in this build, just to show a different form of construction. So let's get started. Now the way in which this is going to be built is I'm going to have to prop this wing up, because obviously I'm going to build this into the new wing that's going to be built this side. So I'm just going to check to see where I need to be on the video, about there. So I'm going to get a block to prop this wing up so it gives me the correct dihedral. Now I'm starting this build exactly the same as I did the other wing half. That is, sticking the lower spar down to the lower D-box balsa sheeting. Now, I must admit that I've naively assumed that everybody watching this video will know what the heck I'm talking about when I'm talking about a D-box, but bearing in mind this video is not necessarily aimed at experienced builders who do know what I'm talking about, but is aimed at inexperienced builders who may not have a clue about what I'm talking about when I'm saying D-box. So I'm going to explain that in a moment. Right, so a D-box. As the name implies, a D-box is the shape of a D. So if we're looking at the camera, vertical, curving round. So the vertical bit is, let's just get a rib to explain it a bit better. So there's the front of the rib, and the D-box is this section here, which is the vertical behind the spar, or incorporating the spar, the bottom going up and round, so in the shape of a D. And it's a completed, glued together, no gaps section of a wing that gives it incredible strength and torsional stiffness. If I take the wing that I've already built, bring that in front of the camera, when I pick that up off the board with only the lower D-box sheeting in place and the upper cap strips, and no cap strips in place, I could twist it. Now when I pick that wing up, that is so incredibly strong, I can't twist that wing, and that's due to this D-box here. And the reason why we're putting in shear webs, which is vertical grain, is because that gives it strength to stop it bending this way. It's very, very strong. Even though if I take an individual spar quarter by quarter, I can merely flex that up and down. But once into the assembly with the shear web, that becomes incredibly strong that way, and the sheeting, the lower edge of the D-box and the upper edge, complete with the leading edge and the shear webs, that enclosed structure, that cell, provides incredible torsional stiffness to a wing. That's what a D-box is. Right, so I've put this in place and just going to move that pin to the rear of that spar, because what I want to do now is to take that wing here and position it where it's going to go, which is with that dihedral brace on top. Now remember what I did on this first wing, I built it and then cut the ribs out. This time I'm going to build it an alternative way, which is I'm going to position the dihedral brace on the lower spar, glue it in place like that, and then going to put the ribs up against the combination of the lower spar and the dihedral brace here, which is a way that you can build the wing to start with. You don't have to do it and cut the this piece here out of the rib afterwards. So if I take those ribs, which were 3/32 of an inch ribs, out of the sheet, there you can see they've got that perforated cut. So I'm going to actually now cut that through, because I don't need that. And I'll end up with a rib in two pieces. So there's my rib in two pieces. And the idea now is that I'm going to glue that first rib there and the back half of it there. Glue it to the rib on the other wing. But before I do that, I need to put my trailing edge sheet in place. And just to double check, I'm going to measure between the lower spar and the back edge, and that is, let's just measure correctly, Ron, there, 135. So I'll go back to here and measure 135, even though I've drawn it. There's my 135 there. So I'm going to put my pin there, and just for good measure, midpoint there. There. Now that's an example. Remember what I said in the previous video, that check to make sure that you haven't got a bow in the balsa. And this is bowed slightly. So I'm just going to measure and spring that trailing edge out. It's only 1/2 mil, but it's 1/2 mil. It's 135. And just pin that in place. And that should be 115 millimeters in between the back of the spar and the front of the trailing edge. So what I can now do is take the cap strips here and cut them all to length. I've got my cutting board here, which is just a bit of hardwood on this front edge and a bit of MDF here, so I can position things against that to make sure that I'm cutting square. So I'm just going to cut 115. So there's my mark of 115. And just cut that one like that. And what that should do is fit nicely, which it does, tightly in between my trailing edge here and my underside D-box sheeting there. So having cut my cap strip to length, what I can do now is cut some scrap balsa to give me my spacing between the cap strips. Now, in the first video I said that you can do this because you've got cap strips that are 10mm wide, you've got ribs that are spaced at 75mm, therefore the gap between the cap strips is 10mm. No, it's not. Forgot the thickness of the rib. The rib itself is 1.5mm wide. Just double check that. That's 1.8. Let's just double check another one. 1.8. Good job I did check this, the 1.8. So the spacing of my cap strips is 75mm, less 5mm obviously for each half of the cap strip, which is 10mm, so that's 65. But I've got to add to that the thickness of the balsa rib. So we're talking about 65 plus 1.8, so that's 66.8. How accurately can I cut 66.8? I doubt if I can cut that very accurately. If it was on the laser I could, but I'm going to cut, let's face it, 66.8 is 67. If I position them here, if I position that in between the two, hopefully I've got it right, my maths are right. There's my spacing. Let's put the rib in the middle between the, there. And now hopefully this, if I put that in the middle, should be 75. And sure enough, there it is, 75, spot on. So that is now my jig, my template for that. Just to make sure that I don't throw that away. Okay, so I'm going to continue now to cut the cap strips to length. I've got this as my spacer, and I'll come back when I'm ready to put those in place. Right, so I'm just about to put the wing half onto the new wing half. Just make sure that when you do this, that you sand down the sheeting top and bottom so it's flush with the rib and also the trailing edge sheeting, because you need a good butt joint between the two. And the other thing to do is you may have to slightly chamfer down the end of the lower spar, because obviously that's going to sit at an angle. The rib is when it meets it. So that's a nice tight fit there, which is good. If it's not a good fit and you haven't got a good joint between the sheeting here, just tweak it a little bit with the sandpaper. Right, so I'm going to apply some glue now to the lower spar where the dihedral brace is going to sit on it, and also I'm going to apply glue to that lower sheeting there and there, and put it in place. making sure the previously positioned trailing edges match up. Pin it in place. I've got a block of wood holding up at the right angle, but I'm pinning it in place here at the trailing edge and through the leading edge as well. And next I'm going to use the cut ribs, and I'm going to stick those in place against the rib of the first half of wing that I did, like so. Push it up and butt it against the rib and the dihedral brace, and I'm going to pin it in place. I want to make sure that's held in place. Make sure that those two ribs are stuck together and that sheeting's in place. Push that down. That's sitting nicely now, ready for the trailing edge sheeting later, and obviously the leading edge sheeting. The next thing to do is to position the next rib. So I've got the pencil line where that next inner rib should go. Put some glue on the where it's going to butt up against there. Make sure that's vertical, and I'm just going to pin that in place because it's not supported. So that's there, and now I've got to put the front piece in, remembering I only want to put glue on the flat underside of the rib there, like so. Again, it is slightly more awkward doing it this way with these split ribs, hence why I did it the other way on the other half. Anyway, the next thing to do is to put this rib in place, which is a 16th rib, and that goes onto the end of the dihedral brace. So once again, I've got to just cut that, and this is going to line up with the end of the dihedral brace. So for this next rib, I've glued the first half of the rib in place, but before we stick the second half, I'm going to put a cap strip in, because this sits on a cap strip. Just gluing the front and the back. Cap strip fits there, making sure that that is centered up to where my rib is going to be positioned. Now this rib can have glue applied to the whole of the underside here. I'm probably doing all this off camera, but there we go. And now glue that rib in, lining again up with the dihedral brace and the lower spar. Pin the trailing edge in position. Right, now that that cap strip's in place, of course I can use my spacer to position all of these. But the first thing I'm going to do before I do that is just check to make sure that that first cap strip I put in was in fact square. Because if that's slightly out, then I'm going to have all of them going out as I go up the line. Push against that, push the cap strip in place, move the spacer down. What I should have done actually was do that, cap strip in place, pin the side of the cap strip, spacer back up to the top. Push the cap strip in, and now ribs, with the rib spacer, I'm going to be putting those in and then finish that wing off. I've now ploughed on and I've stuck all the cap strips in. I stuck the ribs in place, and I've also glued in the top spar onto the dihedral brace there and right the way through. So I'm going to let that dry now. Right, I'm on the place of the build where I'm going to put the shear webs, and I keep mentioning shear webs. It's a bit like the D-box that I said earlier. I'm assuming that everybody knows what a shear web is. Well, the shear web, just for those that don't, as the infill of material that goes between the top spar and the bottom spar and in between the ribs. And it is grain that doesn't go this way, it goes vertically. Now, why do we have a shear web? Well, as I said in my earlier video, if I get a bit of spar material here, and if I flex it, it will bend. Putting a shear web, gluing that to the spar, top and bottom, will prevent that bending. Now, a word of caution with shear webs, they must be a tight fit, a good fit, a snug fit between the ribs. You need continuity. You need rib, shear web, and so on. You don't want any gap, because if you get a gap between the shear web and the rib, then the rib can do that, which defeats the point of having the shear web. And that gives a wing, the shear web gives a wing incredible amount of strength and stops that wing flexing. Now, arguably on this wing, I didn't need to go to the full span with the shear web. I could have kept the shear web to, say, within the 3 bays of the wing tip. I didn't really need them there, because most of the bending moment is going to be in the first 2/3 of the wing, not the last third or quarter, 3/4, quarter, call it what. That's where most of the bending, not there. However, I decided for the ease of build, simplicity of build, and also to add a lot more strength with very little additional weight, because each of these individual shear webs, minimal weight, gives tremendous strength. So that's why I put them in place. So there you have it. That's what a shear web is, and it forms part of what I said earlier in the video, the D-box. So that whole thing is like a tube in the shape of an airfoil at the front of the wing, gives it tremendous strength. As with the first half of the wing, I've removed this from the board, and I've sanded the false leading edge down here so that the profile of it matches the profile of the ribs, so that when I put the top sheeting on, it will curve nicely to the false leading edge. I've also taken the time just to sand or plane down the overlapping bottom sheet roughly, and obviously I'll finalise that when I put the top sheeting on. So I'm going to pin that back on the board. That is important. You must pin it back on the board, because at the moment you can see when that wing has got twist in it, still got twist. When I've got the top section of the D-box in, that wing will not have any twist in it at all, or very, very little. So it's important that you pin the wing down, propping up the, obviously because we've got dihedral now in place, we've got to prop up underneath here, as I said earlier. So I'm just going to pin that, repin that to the board in that position, and then I'll be able to put my D-box top section on and my cap strips. Right, so the moment of truth. I've unpinned the wing from the board, so let's get her off the board and see what it's like. It's pretty good to me. Obviously it needs to be sanded down. Got good firm joints there. But the most important thing is, does it twist when I get that? Look at that. Firm as anything, really great. So yes, I'm going to need to do some sanding down. Cap strips, I've got 1, 2 slightly proud there, need sanding down, but that will be taken care of in the overall sanding. I also need to sand and cut back the top sheet on the D-box, and then we will be good to go with regards to finishing off the wing, which will be the wing tips and the actual leading edge. And the idea with the leading edge, let me just get this wing here. You can see here, hopefully here, you can see there's the false leading edge. There's my lower sheeting coming over it, my upper sheeting coming over it. And what we now do is we cap that with another strip of balsa over the top of that, glued on, and then ultimately when that's dry we'll sand that to the leading edge profile. It's a method of construction that good old Pete Miller used, and I totally support that use. It's really good, makes for a nice neat leading edge. So I'll be doing that in a moment. I've reached my centre sheeting, so I'm just going to glue it in place. I'm using Superfatic. It's quick, dries quickly as well. All done. Good. Now I'll let that dry, and then I will do the the proper leading edge. So the leading edge is now going in place, and what I've done, you can just see it there, I've cut a bevel on the end so that they butt up. On the other one as well, they butt up tightly on the front of the false leading edge. PVA liberally applied. Right, put that in place and just slide it backwards and forwards to get the glue evenly distributed. There. Make sure that you line up the leading edge. It's slightly wider than is necessary for you to sand to shape. Just make sure it lines up with the sheeting. You don't want to see any edge of any of the sheeting, either top or bottom. And then pin in place. So I'm going to do the same to this one as well now. When I'm shaping the leading edge of the wing, I'm using my razor plane because that's a quick and easy way of removing balsa. Be a bit careful that you don't hold the razor plane 90 degrees to the wood. Hold it at a slight angle. That way you can get some thin slithers of balsa rather than large chunks off, because what you don't want to do is obviously bite into the sheeting that butts up against the leading edge. And then after I've done that, I'll use my sanding bar, as we've seen before, and that will allow me to sand to profile. Now, word of warning, when you're holding the wing down on the bench, be careful of where you put your hand. It may seem fairly obvious, but spread the load of your hand. Don't hold on to an individual rib, otherwise you can end up breaking that as you apply pressure with the sanding bar. So pressing down firmly and then just sanding the leading edge balsa strip to blend in with the sheet on the upper surface and obviously lower surface of the D-box. Not a lot of sanding to be done here, but I'm trying to make a smooth transition between the two. Be careful with the sandbar as well. You don't go too close to the center because that can dig into the other wing as well. So I'm just trying to remove the lip between the two, just rubbing it with my fingers to see where there's a bit of balsa protruding above the sheeting, and just rub that down. And that's what I'm trying to form, a nice curve, an airfoil curve, the continuation of the rib section right the way through, nicely curved from the sheeting down over the balsa leading edge. I'm going to do the same to the other wing, of course. Just trying to remove that lip that is there between the sheeting and the leading edge balsa strip. So just at the center section you may need to turn the sanding bar round and just rub it down like that. Doesn't take long. As you can see, there's a nice smooth transition between the sheeting and the balsa leading edge. That's what we're aiming to do. Any slight imperfection there will show up on the covering film that you put on top, so make sure that's nice and smooth. If we look at the underside, you'll see what I mean. Let me turn the wing round. You can see there's the lip of the balsa leading edge, which has just been planed down and hasn't been sanded. I need to make sure that's smooth. So that's what I'm trying to achieve with the sanding bar, to get rid of that lip. To help me sand leading edges to profile, other than using the sanding bar, I 3D printed myself a set of profile sanders like this. Sandpaper stuck to the inside. I've got various sizes to suit the size of leading edge that I'm working on. All I have to do now is just to rub this up and down the partially finished leading edge to get it to profile. As you can see here, nearly there already, just a slight bit to do on the top there. Right, so the wingtips have been glued on and dry, pins removed, so it's time now to shape these. So I lift the wing up vertically, making sure that I don't hit anything above. And holding that in position, I'm going to use my razor saw now to cut off the main chunks of balsa that aren't required. So cutting down here. Got to be a little bit careful you don't hold the wrong thing on the wing, because if you hold a rib too far up you'll probably end up breaking it. Again, I've just got to position this, there we go, so it doesn't hit my rafters above. Cut off that chunk. And do the same with the other tip. The more I can cut off, obviously, the less sanding I have to do, or carving to shape I have to do. Last bit there. Now the way I'm designed this wing is slightly different than the previous wings. I've only got a 12.5 or ½ inch wide balsa wingtip, so I'm not going to form a curve down on that. I'm just going to round the edges off. I'm just going to carve that now. Now I will use my razor plane to take off large chunks, or I could use a sanding bar. I'll finish off my wingtips with the sanding bar, but I could also use the Permagrit sanding bar as well, which takes off quite a bit of balsa in one go, so be a little bit careful with it, but that's an alternative to the razor plane. So a combination of those should get you there or thereabouts. So I'm going to continue with this carving and come back when I finished it. With the wingtips more or less finished, you can see I've sanded them to a nice profile. I'm just got to round the edges off, and I'll do that in a minute. I thought it'd be worthwhile just checking the lateral balance. A lot of the time this is overlooked, but it can be quite important. Maybe not so much on the SoarcerEee, but certainly if you were looking at a more precision aerobatic type model, then yes, you would want to laterally balance the wings. So all I'm going to do is just plonk this down on the bench, make sure you can see it, more or less level, and see what happens. If I push that wing down and release it, push it down, release it. That's not bad. If I do the same with this wing and release it, that's pretty well balanced. If you do have a situation where, you know, one wing is really going down or that one's going down, you can always put some balsa or little ply strips in the, I'll just move this through there so you can see it on the camera, just on the inside here of the outer rib, which will be hidden from view, but at least it will balance the wing. So the last thing, and the only thing I've got to do now for the wing before it's going to be covered, is just finish it off with my hand sandpapering. So as I said earlier videos, I use a P240 grit just to lightly go over the surface, just to remove any grain that's been raised. But the other thing I want to remove is, if I'm going to cover this in clear, which I'm going to, I want to remove pencil lines. I don't want them showing through. So I'm just going to go over that in a moment, but firstly I'm going to deal with my wingtips. This is just a pure guess to see what it looks like. All I'm going to do is just round those off. So I'm not putting any pronounced curve on those whatsoever. I'm just rounding them off here, so there's no sharp edges as such. This is where I wish I had my dust extract all finished and set up. So that's what I've done, if you can see that on the camera, but you can see it's just taking the edge off there and round there. And I'm going to leave the wingtips like that. When I'm sanding, when I'm doing final sanding, what I didn't show was I usually put it on, as I've shown in a previous video, my foam block. And and that's to prevent damage occurring to parts of the wing, like bashing on the bench, which it did a little while ago, but hasn't created any damage, caused any damage. So let's just finish off the wing here, the wing tips I should say. Don't forget to do your lateral balance if you're interested in that sort of thing again after this, because you may have taken off more on one tip than another. I'm pleased with that. That'll do. I can cover that now. So I'm just going to go over the whole lot now and remove the odd pencil mark that I've got there that may be shown through. Go over the wing centre sheeting here, and I'll continue that off camera so I won't bore you. Well, there you have it, guys. That's the completion of the wing, the balsa bits anyway. So we'll be moving on next to the fuselage and the tail feathers. Anyway, hope you liked the video. As per normal, put likes down below, put comments down below. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. I look forward to seeing you in the next in this series of build videos. Thanks for watching. Bye.